Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Cod Cabin. I'm Jack Leary, and I'm joined by Adam Bass, Jesse Hahn, and Logan Rabe. We are continuing today in our series of interviews, and today we have Natalia Linos. I double-checked my pronunciation on that one. Another of the long laundry list of candidates running for Massachusetts' 4th Congressional District. Natalia, it is great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jack, and everyone else.
Of course. Now, to start, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running?
Sure. So, Jack, I'm a social epidemiologist. I currently serve as the executive director of the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard, and I have 15 years of experience in public service, both at the global level at the United Nations, as well as at the local level at the New York City Health Department. And it felt that someone with my background in global relations, international relations, as well as an epidemiologist, a public health expert, was what was needed for this time to get us through COVID-19 and build a future that actually works for everyone. So I'm running on a platform for science and equity, and I hope that the voters across District 4 will feel that that is a necessary skill to get us out of this mess.
Great. I actually wanted to talk about your experience for my first question here. As you said, a lot of your professional experience is in New York City, either at the United Nations or with the Department of Health. So I wanted to ask what made you decide to move to Brookline and, more importantly, to the 4th Congressional District?
So, Jack, I've lived in Brookline now twice. I've lived in Massachusetts 3 times. I moved to Brookline to take my job at Harvard at the School of Public Health, and it is, I have shared this before, but I'm in a car-free household. So it was important for me to live somewhere where I could use public transportation to get to work. And that is why I live in Brookline. But I have lived here before. I lived in Brookline Village as a doctoral student too when I was doing my PhD, and really love the community. I really like the feel. It's diverse in terms of languages spoken. My daughter goes to Pierce. It's the elementary school in Brookline Village. And, in her classroom, there are 11 different languages. It's quite impressive.
Wow. All right, great. I'll pass it to Adam for our next question here.
Once again, thank you for joining us, Natalia. I want to talk about something that I've been taking note of in covering this race. And to me, I think you've had the most surprising rise in this race. As you said in our last interview, you started late. You were one of the final candidates to sign up for the race. And yet you have managed to gain such a headway with especially younger voters. You were recently endorsed by Haley Fleming. Hi, Haley, if you're listening to this, of the College Democrats of Massachusetts, as well as other youths within the community. So how does it feel to finally start to get headway in this race, as well as managing to raise an impressive $200,000 in the last quarter?
So, Adam, it's exciting. And I can say that we have had success after success since the very beginning. And, you mentioned that I was the last person entering the race. That was a week before the nomination papers were due, and we got 1,200 signatures in 5 days. That was the first sign that there is a deep desire for someone with my profile. And I do think that, people know and recognize that I'm not running because I have always wanted to be a congresswoman. I'm running because the time is right for someone with my profile. And given COVID-19, it would be disastrous to only have 14 congresspeople with a science background. So the momentum is there. I am so excited to have Haley, as well as other young Democrats, other youth across the district get behind me. I think it's because I can speak to issues and connect the dots across climate change, across health, across police brutality, and I have a proven track record having worked on all these issues. I was writing about racism and health 3-4 years ago in some of the top journals, including The Lancet. I was writing about police not being involved in COVID months before we saw the Black Lives Matter movement, because I have worked on this issue for a really long time. I led the UNDP's work on climate change and health, and one of the most fulfilling experience was bringing together youth activists from different parts of the world, from the Maldives and Fiji, which are facing an existential crisis today, as well as from London and the UK, some of the leaders, Kenya, Nigeria, the Philippines, and bringing youth leaders from across the world and talking about how do we mobilize the youth sort of momentum and movement that has gotten real attention at the global level, and how do we use it for progress. So I think young voters know that I am serious about listening to them. They also know that I am going to take their side and care about their future. So yes, phenomenal momentum. We have 230 plus volunteers. And I do think that that creates a win strategy for me that, you know, I may not catch up with some of the candidates in terms of having millions of dollars, but with a real volunteer base. And let me give you one more piece of info, Adam. I'm also polling in terms of our internal polls and how what feedback we're getting really well with 65 plus.
Wait. Let me see if I can get that. There's going to be a poll soon, if that's what you're saying.
No.
Oh, okay.
As we do our phone banking, we've been collecting information. So I have a group of volunteers who are data scientists.
Oh, okay.
And I have a behavioral economist, I have a couple Microsoft data scientists, and a few pollsters who don't, you know, who I'm not paying, but they've given us advice on how well we do information. We've been doing, you know, Facebook kind of ads and really looking at the data very carefully. And I'm doing really well with 65 plus, which is quite exciting. And we had hypothesized that I would be doing well with women, but that's not the case. It's women and men. So
well, there you go. Trust me, we are very thirsty for a poll in this race ever since the internal from Becky Grossman came out. Jesse, why don't you go next?
Yeah. So one thing I find really cool, really innovative about your campaign is that it's really tailor-made for this moment. And I think we're going to keep on talking about that. But one of the questions I'm going to have is the issue of reopening schools. The president has talked about, you know, we're just going to reopen everything, whatever happens. The governor has been more cautious on this matter. He's asked cities and towns to issue their own plans, their own guidance. So as an epidemiologist, I wanted to hear your take on reopening. Is it safe for kids to return to school? And what measures will need to be taken once they're in school?
that's a great question, Jesse. And let me take a few minutes to talk about it because it's part of my COVID plan. I think reopening schools is important from an equity perspective. It's really important. We're not going to be, have a vaccine or anything really distributed to everyone for at least a year, maybe 2 years. So we can't really, the cost to education for kids, privileged, wealthy, well-educated families will figure out a way, but other families might not. So we have to take education seriously. So I do think we need a plan. Now, the core question should be, how do we reopen safely? And that includes looking at the data, and the data suggests that for younger kids, so under 10, the risk both of infection and of transmission, so whether they're likely to basically be the vector between their peers, is lower than for older ones. So middle school, high school, we think there is a bigger risk, but for elementary school children, there's a lower risk. Now, that doesn't mean that there's zero risk. So we have to make sure that we reopen safely, and safely for the teachers. There will be teachers who are high risk, and they should have a choice to work from home remotely, and therefore, schools will have to figure out workarounds. But there will be teachers who are, relatively young and healthy and prefer to teach in a classroom. So I think by allowing teachers to choose who wants to be there, providing federal support, not only guidance, but support, financial support to schools to ensure that everybody has masks, that they can retrofit classrooms so that there's water and soap. And, there are a lot of measures that we can put in place. So I'm of the opinion that yes, we must open, but to do so, we need to equip our schools and we need to open smartly. It also means, Jesse, that we may need to delay other things. In order to open this September, we may need to not be opening indoor dining and gyms. And I know, the governor has done that, but really a lot of parents are saying, do we really need gyms? We don't want gyms and other, reopening other parts of the economy to cause a surge. And then in September, we're all stuck at home. So I speak both as a parent of 3 little kids who is tired of being home with kids. I am concerned about the inequities on the educational outcomes. I'm also deeply concerned about the inequities for working moms. Disproportionately, they're the ones who are going to stay home with kids. And what will that mean for, our workforce and what we've been fighting for in terms of equal wages? So I'm an epidemiologist, and, it may not be the most, obvious answer from an epidemiologist, but I do think that opening schools is important. Now, President Trump today said that the CDC has offered too complicated guidelines for schools. I believe we need complex guidelines, we need accurate guidelines, and then we need the federal government to step in and provide the resources. So we can't open in an unsafe way, but we should open.
It's cool to hear your response from an equity standpoint. I'll toss it to Logan for the next question.
Thank you, Jesse. So obviously we've seen the public health effects from COVID, but then also there's economic effects. It's been rumored that Congress is working to pass a second stimulus bill to help with recovery. What would you like to see Congress focus on the most in this bill?
Thanks so much, Logan. And I want to tie it to maps, but I don't know how I can tie it to maps, just to give you a shout out for the work you're doing. I do think it's important for scientists to be looking at the distribution. And so your map works, somehow I'm going to tie it into this conversation. But for the economics question, I believe we have to think of two different issues. One is for the average family, do they have an income? Do they have enough, cash on hand to get the food they need and, ensure that they're not thrown into poverty because of this. But the bigger question on the economy is about small businesses. It's about how we structure unemployment benefits. It's about how we think about opening and rebuilding and restoring our economy in a way that is basically strategic and it's thought through. So I think that daycares, for example, need to open because that's a foundation for workers to get to work, right? So daycares, for example, may not be top of mind for most people, but for a working family, it's really important. So I think we need to have a timeline and strategize as to what is the most important business to allow for our economy to continue growing. So, using data, using the evidence that we have, I think that the Congress needs to do a lot more to ensure that small businesses are getting the money that has been, allocated. We knew from the from the first sort of package that it was large companies, it was, wealthy institutions, it was, bailing out those who actually don't necessarily serve our communities. So really making sure that the money is getting to the right places and making sure that families and consumers are able to have cash to spend. So, you can open all the restaurants, but if no customer comes, then you're really not serving anyone. So the economic recovery is key, but it's important as a public health person to say again and again that a health recovery is essential for an economic recovery. A big risk that lies ahead is that we reopen too fast and then we shut down everybody. We reopen again and shut down. And this multiple cycling of shutting down is bad for the economy.
I'll pass it to Jack for our second round of questions.
Great. I want to pivot away from coronavirus a little bit and talk about transportation. On your website, you talk about securing a lot of federal funds for projects like South Coast Rail, but what do you think the biggest problems are with the MBTA as it currently exists, and what kind of projects would you like to see specifically for rehabilitating what we have already, the infrastructure we have already?
Yeah, so there's a lot that has to be done to rehabilitate infrastructure, to make it accessible for people with disabilities. I was just talking to a community in Franklin, and they were saying that their commuter rail is not accessible. So accessibility is key. I'm interested in the proposals, that have been put forward to make transportation free. I think there is something to be said around that. So I know you said switch out of COVID, but I do think that a lot of the arguments that have been made around why we're not investing, say in the South Coast Rail and things like that, is that it's too costly. But today and tomorrow and the next 6 months and 18 months, the federal government is going to be paying a lot of money to get workers back into jobs. And, traditionally those could be, building new roads, but we could say that let's align the COVID response with the Green New Deal and let's invest in our public infrastructure and use this, not say it's not going to cost money. It is going to cost money, but we were going to spend money to create, the public transportation that we have wanted for a very long time. So the types of issues, but back to your question, the types of issues I would care about is that, stations and, accessibility, but also, even lines. Some parts of our district have a single line rather than a double line, which means that it's slower as well as not as efficient. That, not as frequent scheduling. Trains should be running on time so that people actually use it. Unpredictability means that someone who has a car will probably say, oh, public transportation is not predictable, and they'll switch to using a car. So predictable, timely, and affordable are the key parts. And why I, as an epidemiologist, care about public transportation is because it's a triple win. It's a win for public health because of the impact through air pollution and walkability. People are walking more. It's a win for the environment because of the emissions. We know 40% of emissions are because of transportation. And it's a win for the average commuter who's trying to get to their job. It creates opportunities for connecting to new jobs and not having to be stuck in traffic for 2 hours. So I'm a huge proponent of public transport.
I guess Massachusetts is just about the only state where you can run a campaign on predictable trains as a political issue.
Yeah.
There's a song about it.
Yeah. Here, I'll throw it to Adam for our next question.
Yeah. So continuing on with infrastructure and the environment, something I keep forgetting to ask candidates, especially since I go to Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. Norton, for the longest time, it's been a part of Massachusetts for, I think, since 80-82. It has suffered from a water crisis. There has been the water supply at Norton is not very sanitary. It has excess amount of iron, so much so that people cannot have a clean drink. People cannot take a good bath. There are several Facebook sites called Norton Water Sucks. All right, and it is become a problem that many politicians have not addressed. And this could expand into areas like Mansfield, Attleboro, and God forbid Fall River, which is a crucial area for Massachusetts for. So my question is, I know Elizabeth Warren back in 2014, 2015 wanted to take on a project regarding keeping the federal government accountable and providing funding to clean up the water of Norton. Specifically, what would you do for the constituents of Norton, Massachusetts if you become a congresswoman? And what would be the process of making sure that their water is constantly clean, devoid of excess iron, and just safe to use without parents worrying?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And Adam, I have worked on water quality at the New York City Health Department, and it's important. I mean, we know from Flint, we know from other places, water is, a fundamental right, having access to water and clean water. And the quality of water, there are some things that matter more than others. So, the public health folks will tell you that, maybe it looks a little cloudy or it tastes a little iffy, but it's okay, So we would have to figure out what is the real challenge. Is it that the pipes are, there's old pipes and there's lead or something leaking in? Then that's pretty fundamentally problematic. Is it that the source of the water is polluted? So I don't know the details about what's going on with the water quality in Norton, but I can tell you how I would approach the issue. One is to listen to constituents and listen carefully to say that no family should have to be buying bottled water because they're scared to give their kids the water. So yes, I acknowledge it's an issue. Then I would have to figure out where the source is, right? Is it a source in the infrastructure, or is it a source in where the water's coming from? You probably know the answer, Adam. So
yeah, it's actually interesting that you mentioned bottled water, because there's also the fact that one of the only supermarket in Norton, the Roach Brothers, is closing after this year. So now it's really dependable that they need tap water.
Yeah. No, that's really important. So yeah, I don't have an answer other than to say to you that as a public health person, I would take any health worries very seriously, and that there are ways to clean water. There are ways it might be costly if it's, at the source versus if it's the infrastructure, but that is a fundamental right. People should not get sick from their water quality. So I would take it head on.
I think if people of Norton are listening, they would be applauding at this point. I'm going to turn it over to Jesse again.
Yep, thanks. So one thing that us here on the podcast have talked about is that the key to winning a congressional race in this state is to concentrate support in a city and a few suburbs around it, and then you basically got a congressional seat. So I was wondering, a lot of candidates in this race seem to be from the northern part of the district, be it Brookline or Newton. And, the southern part of the district's not getting a lot of love in terms of candidate representation. So what is your plan to reach out to those people in the southern part of the district who, demographically speaking, aren't really that closely connected to the northern part of the district?
Yeah. And, Jesse, for me, it's not part of a win strategy. It's part of my campaign and caring about equity that I want to pay attention to the South Coast and to, residents of Fall River and Taunton and Somerset, the people who have been left behind in Massachusetts. And so I care about them because my campaign and my platform is around equity. So let me just say that. And I have been reaching out to folks through, the Democratic sort of town committee infrastructure, but also to some constituencies that I think are key to my win. So I think that healthcare workers are going to be key. So I've been talking to nurses down in Fall River about their experiences. I've been talking to doctors and other frontline workers. It's hard for someone like me who entered late and who doesn't have deep ties. But what has been exciting and also reassuring is that every time I speak on Zoom with a community, at least one or two people say, I'd like to volunteer. So we're having a South Shore sort of event Thursday. That's in 2 days. I've lost track of time. And that's how we're hoping, we use Zoom to do that. Is that tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
All right, good. So I don't actually, miss my Zoom. Luckily, I have a great campaign team that, reminds me what day of the week it is, plus what I'm doing next. But yeah, so we're having like Zoom conversations. I'm reaching out to, because of COVID, it's a little tough. Amanda, who was one of the people who endorsed me recently, has said to me, she's like, I'd love to be out on the streets in Fall River. I'm not enjoying the whole, phone calls. And so I hope that with the weather being nice, if we can socially distance, just be outside. But I want to say that I am paying attention. As a Greek American, I feel a deep affinity to the Portuguese community there. And, we have similar cultures, similar food, similar, desire to be near water. So there is that. In terms of, other communities that is resonating, obviously, Brookline and Newton, but Wellesley has turned out really impressively for me. I have so much support from Wellesley, and I don't know if it's the academic, that side, or if it's just word of mouth, but I'm quite excited about that too.
It's great to hear. I'll toss it to Logan.
Yeah, my question is about, obviously we saw the horrific murder of George Floyd back in May. What are your plans to address police brutality? And also, how would you address systemic racism?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Logan. And it's something that I have been thinking about for a very long time, for years. I've been working on police violence and health for many years. Before, the murder of George Floyd is has been maybe a wake-up call or something. It triggered an amazing response of solidarity across our nation, across internationally even, but his murder was not the first, it won't be the last. So, I've been involved in talking about and thinking about police violence and police brutality for a very long time. The types of solutions that are important, some may sound a little nerdy and not, and bureaucratic, but let me give you one of them. We don't have a national registry of police-involved killings. Public health departments get informed in real time if somebody tests for tuberculosis, for example, because that's a problem and we need to know about it. We don't get that information about police-involved killings. And so we rely on media, on The Guardian, The Counted, or anybody who's trying to research to actually know what are the numbers, what are the causes, what happened, has to do workarounds to figure it out. And that's a problem. And for someone who cares about data, being able to know which communities have the most police violence means that there's something you can do about it. I do believe that, we have to make a lot of other changes. Data is one piece. Get military grade weapons off of our streets. Police departments should not have tanks and, pretend that, that is just unacceptable. I do believe that we need to have a conversation about whether police actually need to carry weapons at all times. That is something that in other countries they don't. And, let's talk about it. And I do believe that people of color, especially Black Americans and poorer Americans, are overly surveilled. That's not the right word, but basically the surveillance in their neighborhoods that leads to many more interactions with the police that can turn violent. So if you are in Brookline in a park drinking alcohol, chances are the police will not come and, tell you off. But if you're in another part of our district, in Fall River in a park, maybe they will. And so that interaction increases your risk of it getting violent or problematic. Fundamentally, I think we need to stop criminalizing poverty, mental illness, homelessness. And on that note, I believe in defunding the police in the sense of we need to be paying for social workers, for public health people, to be doing the work of first responders. We don't need the police to be responding to a mental crisis, And I worked in New York City at the health department when we were dealing with the opioid overdose crisis. And, the police would get access to naloxone or other opioid, prevention sort of things. But for every public health partnership between the NYPD and the Department of Health, the Department of Health would get like $1 and the NYPD would get $4. Like that is not acceptable. So that's the piece about the police. Now, your other piece about systemic racism, that we need to acknowledge it's not just our institution, the police, that is racist. We have to deal with systemic racism across all areas, academia, across our housing policies. Redlining was the government instituting racist policies, and that has led to wealth inequities that are so stark that, we have to deal with them. So I believe in reparations. I believe that the conversation about reparations has to happen today, and that we're in a unique opportunity to have that conversation. And, systemic racism falls into, environmental racism. So I could go on and on. I don't want to proceed, but I think it is important to say that it's not just the police, that all of our institutions need to have a rethink. And, fundamentally, we need to acknowledge that we have a racist history and it's ongoing, and that has an impact on the daily lives. And at a minimum, the conversation on reparations has to happen now.
Great. Well, Natalia, I'm sorry. That is all the time we have today, but thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciated having you on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated it too.
Of course. And for everyone listening, this has been another interview for our series on the 4th Congressional District campaign and candidates. And I hope you come back and join us next week. But until then, this is the Cod Cabin signing off.